I'm Trek with 2Ks. All right. Of course, I did it again. Of course, I friggin' did it again. Like, that's the issue. Step back. Hola, hola. How's it going, GnGs? My name is Shrek with 2Ks. This is Shrek with 2Ks Live. And it's a Monday. I feel like the Monday is a better day because the vibe works for me. But we'll see how about by the end of this episode, right? Um, and then I tried to do it a little bit earlier, and then I got caught up watching some Joe Button clip thing with Mona, and then I was doing some research about something that I'm going to talk about in a couple in relation to the Bank Secrecy Act. Um, light in regards to the number of topics to cover today. If you've seen the Twitter post and what that looked like, but you know me and my tangents and rambles and like I remember when stuff. So we'll see how this work out, right? But yeah, I got a couple of things. And we're gonna go from there. What's going on, BK Crypto? Thanks for jumping in early. I appreciate. So for those who don't know, the basic idea behind this particular series is I go through Twitter and I find things that scratch my brain, right? I generally stay very far away from price talk stuff in terms of telling you what you should put in or how you can get the lick or all of that stuff. All I know is when it comes to financialization of stuff and like dealing with trading, things go up, things go down. Humans are humans, right? Some people are on the FUD, some people are on the what's the other one? Not FOMO. I can't remember the other one right now, but nonetheless, I stay away from those kind of topics. There's definitely other people out on the YouTube world, and as well as folks that are on the Gentleman Crypto Network who do a better job at describing and giving you insight to those things. I am not one of them, and I'm okay with that. I talk to the stuff that, you know, again, scratches my brain. And I will say X number of times in my opinion. So no, sorry, in my mind, not IMO, it's IMM. But yeah, so hopefully everybody had a good weekend. Hopefully you didn't freeze your butt off outside. It was kind of cold, and it was like the snow on what was that, Thursday, Friday? But anywho, yeah. Hopefully everybody had a good weekend. Here we are on to this Monday. Oh, I got another example when I get into this story about the Bank Secrecy Act and how I went to 3 different LLMs, aka AIs, right? And they all did something similar in terms of how they gave me information. It was X amount of like detail information too, right? But the way that it spun the historical narrative around the person this gentleman named Clifford Sommer. It might be Summer, Sommer. Might be pronouncing it wrong, but guy from back in like the 70s and stuff like that. He was a um the what is it, the bank advocate guy, whatever. I'm gonna get into it in a couple, but just a heads up, like I am definitely starting to notice how AI is definitely doing that 1980s double speak. And if you've been watching these episodes, at least let's say over the last 3 months, I've brought up more than once how I looked into a particular subject, asked a question or two. I did it on more than one LLM, and then the initial answer given back is opposite of what the actual historical thing is. We're gonna get into that in a couple. Um, Let me set this up for the initial topic at hand. So yeah, let's jump into this one. Boom. All right. So this is from Woo Blockchain. Oh, by the way, like if y'all find some interesting stuff over on Twitter, again, with the filter of I don't do the price talk stuff, right? And when I do cover things like this as they relate to the financing of crypto, it's more about the like, here's what's coming down the pike for adoption. And this post actually goes to something I talked about last week with that the Gonzalez post where the lady was talking about like, is it absorption? Well, really, she was saying that it is absorption. Wall Street is absorbing um crypto, but she was particularly focused on Bitcoin, like back or absorbing it into the TradeFi behavior realm environment stuff and doing it through derivatives, ETFs, notes, what is it, collateral and things along that line. And lo and behold, I'm scrolling through Twitter today earlier, and then I see this joint, and then it started popping up on a couple people's of the different channels I follow, their stuff. So basically, the acting CFTC chairman Caroline Pham announced the launch of a digital. Yo, she's been acting for a while, bro. Like she came in during the Biden administration. You would think everything would have been like solidified in her position by now, but whichever. Um, Continue on to reading, right? Acting CFTC Chairman Caroline Pham announced the launch of a digital asset collateral pilot program allowing BTC, ETH, and USDC to be used in US derivatives markets. Along um, Alongside new guidance for tokenized collateral, and what is it? MPD also withdrew staff advisory 20-34, stating that developments in digital assets and the use of tokenized collateral, including the enactment of the Genius Act, have made the advisory outdated and no longer relevant. Some people would argue this is a good thing because it's going to allow for TradeFi and the more business side of the finance world to get involved into crypto, right? This is going to be the whole like, oh, well, now there'll be more liquidity in the space. Other people would argue, like the posting account I talked about last week, Gonzalez, no, this is actually absorption moving away from the initial point of crypto, which also goes to the other story that I covered like the 2 or 3 weeks before that, that Italia Bitcoin thing that was like, well, we're going to custody, we're going to take people's cash, convert it into Bitcoin, and then we're going to hold the Bitcoin while we do third-party transactions that allow us to self-custody on behalf of the people who put in on the equity to get the Bitcoin to then like. And I've said this before, like as you look at how the technology develops, as you look at just like anything that has a base layer to it, once you get the government and business people involved, there's always a level of like, oh, well, we figured out how to remove you from the base layer, and we're going to sell this to you as a convenience factor. We're going to sell this to you as this is what it means to be modern. We're going to sell this to you as this is what it means to advance in society. Like, who still holds gold? Like, what's wrong with you? Why would you do that? Who doesn't get involved in derivatives versus holding the primary asset itself? Why would you do that? The more sophisticated, educated financial player or responsible financial person would get into stocks, would get into derivatives, because that's like arguably a signal of your maturity or of your level of financialization and like understanding like, well, this is what the smart people do in order to like build capital and work towards some kind of let's say concept of generational wealth. But here we are, this is being put in now. We're going to see how this play out during this administration, and I would argue the kick in the teeth is not going to be during this administration. The kick in the teeth is going to be in who comes after. Arguably, it's the initial administration, like how to say this? The what is it? The falling the it's not the falling of the guard. It's like the basically shit is gonna actually go downhill and fall apart. And arguably, IMM in my mind, not during this administration. Yes, this administration is doing X number of things that are just like, what the hell? The chaos is real. But you also have to take into account like how it works in terms of the buildup and the ripple effect. So we can't see it quote right now. We can hypothesize and like conspiracy theory hold this all day long. But it's not until we get 6 months plus, 9 months plus, 15 months plus, 24, 36, you know what I'm saying? 48. Like, it's not until we get X number of months and years down the road where like we see the decisions that are made right now compounded on the decisions that were made during the Biden administration, during the Obama administration, during Trump's first run, during Bush Jr.'s run, Bush Sr.'s run. Like, these things are all compounding on one another in terms of the legislation that we're coming up with through Congress, in terms of the way the Supreme Court is saying what they're saying, and in terms of just what whoever is the commander in chief is doing at the time, whether it be through executive order, whether it be through the foreign bilateral trades and the things that they say and slash do in relation to other countries, as well as what happens internally, right? These things compound out. And so when we get like, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years down the road, like some of us who keep a better recollection than others are going to be like, yeah, you remember when President blah 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 did this executive order X, Y, and Z, or like the Congress voted on this thing that said X, Y, and Z, and X number of people are going to have no recollection of this stuff, none. And some people will have been prudent enough to keep some form of proof that like these things were said. This event happened. This thing was voted on this day. That's the congressperson who said yes to it. That's the president who was like, I'm cool with this. Right. And then when we're going to get there and you're going to still have people like, oh, no, I don't remember it like that, or no, that's not what happened. Like, case in point, I've brought this up a number of times before. The Dodd-Frank Act. The Dodd-Frank Act, if I remember right, was during Clinton's administration. Most people don't know that. And the reason why I bring that up is because the Dodd-Frank Act plays a large part. I think it's like, what is it, like Section 8 or it's like Section 8 or something, like Section 8, like verse 5 or something along that line. But like that particular act is why banks are able to withhold your money from you. But no one brings that up. No one makes that connection because most people don't remember the Dodd-Frank Act. Most people aren't even aware that the Dodd-Frank Act exists. And usually when you get it told to you, it's about how it like broke the line between commercial and residential banking. But there were a whole bunch of other things in the, what did they call it? The devil's in the details that were in that act that we now see playing out more and more. And I mean, you can do a Google search or two and YouTube videos too, and find a number of people talk about how, whether it be a traditional TradFi financial institution or the new age PayPal, even Cash App, on how they withheld their money for this, that, and the third reason. Sometimes they don't even know the reason, or people being told, well, oh, you never deposited that money, even though I have the bank deposit slip. That's not like, yo, it's so crazy to me now that certain situations, they'll tell you like, oh no, the receipt doesn't mean anything. What do you mean the receipt doesn't mean anything? You're the one who actually has it in your terms of service and bylaws that like receipts count. And now you're telling me no, they don't count, which is why you also got to watch out for when terms of service change. Right. But anywho, this happened. We're gonna see how it play out in terms of like, yeah, the level of absorption. It's absorption. Like I'm definitely, as more things happen, I see how it's absorption. Like the crypto stuff, including Bitcoin, is being absorbed back into the fold of TradFi. And I would argue part of that, and I wrote this out in a blog on LinkedIn when I was talking about this, the Gonzalez thing last week, in that the Wall Street daddy types realized that those of us who had the old ideals of like, economic sovereignty, or like just burn the whole thing down, whatever, we don't want to deal with it. That's the minority voice, minority mindset now. Most folks are just trying to figure out how to get the bag, how to pay, and keep the lights on, keep the roof over their head, keep the clothes on their back, get the kids to school, deal with the daycare. What's the side hustle to get like the extra $20 because I gotta cover this? Like, that is most folks. They're in survival mode. And so that part of economic sovereignty where it's about like positive control, most folks in general don't care for it. And then most of the new folks in the crypto space, who are now the majority of the mindset, they can blow that to the wind. It's about delegated responsibility. So we're getting back into the behavior of treating crypto like it's fiat, like traditional finance. Delegated responsibility, bring back the gate guard. That's at least my take on it. But we're going to see how this play out as more derivative products get introduced to the public, and quote, it makes more liquidity, we're gonna see what happens. In my mind, it's not gonna be a good thing. It's like, what can go wrong? Oh, what can go wrong? This post, shout outs to Peter Van Valkenburg. He definitely, like, I've been following his stuff for a while. He does definitely more like highbrow posts. So if you're not like into reading, or let me not say it that way, if you're not into this, like, how am I saying this? He pays attention to the more like technical, the more legal side of things. Case in point with this post here, which I think is a very relevant post. Once I actually read into it, and it's kind of lengthy, but it is significant. So I'm gonna read some of it. Hopefully, this makes sense to those of you out there who are, you know, still trying to figure out, like, how does the sovereignty stuff play out now in terms of economic sovereignty, even with this crypto stuff, even as it relates to just traditional finance, because this does play a role in what's going on. So let me get into it. Gorsuch remarks today in Trump, and I know I'm saying the name of the judge wrong, I apologize, in Trump versus Slaughter, could be highly relevant for crypto policy and financial surveillance broadly. Hold on one second. Sorry, the sneeze got me. All right. He effectively signaled, if the court unbinds the president's power to fire heads of independent agencies, then they must also remove the president's creeping power to make law through rules and guidance, which is like what the SEC was doing under Biden, where they were like, oh, well, here's our policy on this right now, and then they would go through the legal court case process after companies in the crypto space. So there was never a like, hey, not, let me not say never, but it was not an official, here's the congressional position on crypto based on this law, blah, blah, blah. It was the SEC as a arm of the regulatory body said, well, this is the stance we're going to take, and then we're going to go through court as a way to enforce our rules and guidance and drag these companies and these individuals through the mud in order to give the projection of, hey, crypto isn't cool if you're an individual or if you're a business. If you're doing it outside of how we're telling you to do it, we're going to come down on you. That's what he's talking about in the second, well, the first paragraph. First one's just a whole long line. So, as I've written exclusively, the primary constitutional problem with the Bank Secrecy Act is not the warrantless searches, it's the unbound authority of the president and agencies to decide who is obligated to collect private financial information, what information they should collect and report, and when. That is an unconstrained legislative delegation to the president. Those are choices that, under our Constitution, should only be made by Congress, which there's a whole big argument within this administration. And depending on how much you really pay attention to Congress, it was arguably stuff going on back during Bush 2 administration that what's his name, who recently passed, like, folks was just like, yo, a vice president can do that? Cheney, Dick Cheney, like, he was out here doing stuff that really had, and it depended on what circles of information you was paying attention to back then, because that was college for me. Yeah, I want to say that was like college or later. I don't remember exact year right now, but nonetheless, I do remember enough of when I would just hear some of the things that he was doing or like spearheading as a vice president. And it would always be one of those like, well, vice presidents don't usually really be in it like this. He's very hands-on. And I feel, I'm not even going to run down that rabbit hole of the whole making the guy apologize thing. That was also wild too. But the point being here is that this case, as it goes forward, is a very big thing that could impact, and not, I'm gonna say 9 times out of 10 will have a impact on crypto, assuming that when they do their actual votes on like, hey, does the president have the power to do this? Like, then we need to cut it on this too. Um, just something to throw out to you folks who are trying to be like more aware. And art, it's funny for all of the stuff that's like being pushed out in the headlines, as far as like the alt media and then what's in mainstream media, like depending on what you're listening to, like there's things happening in the Supreme Court area or even within Congress that like you just don't hear about as far as like, well, what was it like? What was it that came out? As we know, or some of us are aware of, last month we had the situation with the two guard soldiers. Um, Sadly, one of them passed, the other one's still dealing with their recovery stuff. But like apparently when that happened, I think it was either the couple of days before, or like the week before, the Supreme Court was like, well, no, you can't do this with the National Guard folks. And then lo and behold, that happens. And not a one soldier has left DC since then, you know? Um, I say that to say, like, there there are things that, and this is the part that goes into the sovereignty part. Like, you actually have to do X amount of work as far as educating yourself, being aware on things such as what is going on within the governmental bodies, like you know this agency or department is taking action this way, then there's another one that has like a separate tasking, but somehow some of what they're doing overlaps, right? Like, I was listening to something today and the lady was making a point about how if the government sees how much we pay in taxes and how much is taken out from our paycheck when we get paid, how is it that we can't just go to the IRS and be like, all right, what's the bill? Like, we should be able to like do that like once a month. Lo and behold, and this makes sense to me. And I'm not saying I'm the most smartest, techiest person in the world, but it makes sense to me on this level because she brought up the point about um what's the thing that the companies do to argue their point or like get laws and acts that work in their favor. um Damn, I can't remember the name of the thing right now, but it's the particular word for when companies either do it themselves directly or they hire agencies on their behalf that will argue their point to legislators. Nonetheless, it turns out that a number of companies argue to the government to not have the IRS website work in a way where people can just directly log in, see what they owe, and be like, okay, well, I have it, boom, here you go. Or like, I don't have it, let's try to work out a plan. So like the way that you have to deal with doing your taxes, and the company, by the way, is Intuit. Intuit is a very big American, I want to say they're American based financial company. And then like another example of something that she brought up was why our paternity leave, no, the maternity leave is the way it is, like why it's so short in America is because the companies that sell baby formula, they were, God, why can't I remember this word? It's not petitioned, but they basically lobbied. There we go. They lobbied for the shorter paternity leave because that meant you were have a as a breastfeeding parent mother, you would have less time to do it, which would mean you would buy more formula. And I was like, well, yeah, like, damn, who counted the beans to figure out that number? The point being, y'all, is there are things that are being voted on that are being put into regulation or taking out of regulation or being enforced in a way that does not follow the actual black and white of the law books. And most folks aren't relatively aware of those events or those things because that's not what the mainstream is talking about. It sounds way too much over your head on the alt side if you're listening to any of the alt stuff. And then if you actually trying to read the stuff, like have fun trying to find some of the information. Cause like it's not just a matter of like it's buried. I mean, excuse me. Even in terms of trying to get like first source stuff, primary source stuff, unless you're like having access to like college level research stuff, just run into your regular library. There's certain things you could find, but if you're really trying to dig in on certain things, you have to go to like more special libraries or have better access to research material. Sorry. But yeah, man, this is something to definitely pay attention to. I imagine that we'll see more of this and how it plays out in the new year. Uh Actually, now like, when are they actually going to take the vote part of it and then publish that out? Because usually it isn't all in a 1 day thing, like with the way the Supreme Court plays out. All right. So this is the other one that got my attention. So Nick Anthony, shout outs to him for doing this for sure. I'm gonna read this through too, and this is the one. Let me jump back for a second, y'all. So this story right here with Nick Anthony, shout outs to him. I again scrolling through on the explore side of what's the thing of Twitter, and I happened to see that it was, I forgot what it was under exactly, but this is another one of those things of like the sovereignty part. Like, you got to do the legwork. If you don't do the legwork, if you get taken advantage of, if you get ostracized, if you get bamboozled, it's like, well, you didn't do the legwork. So you weren't aware of certain information that would have either protected you or at least given you a better leg to stand on of like how you can fight it legally in court, or at least know what to say so that you can't be bullied in court if it comes to that level, right? And to the other point, so, and I didn't know who this person is either, that he talks about, which is Clifford Sommer, Sommer. He was the president of the American Bankers Association, and this is back in the 70s. He was also a veteran, by the way, of what was that, World War II? Yeah, but nonetheless, I've noted, and I've brought this up a couple of times over the last couple of months because I have been moving in more on playing with the LLMs, right? So it's the Grok, it's Perplexity, it's DeepSeek, it's Gemini, it's Claude. Um, I here and there might touch Chat GPT, but for the most part, I mess with all of the other stuff, right? And as I've been pointing out, one of the things that I have noticed is when it comes to historical things, where like somebody wrote a book about it, somebody published, made tweets about it, somebody like is recorded as saying this thing, and this is across the board with them so far, they will give you certain details around a topic or a person, but if you don't know what to scratch on or how to counter what was put out after you gave the prompt of the question, right? It just comes off very 1984ish. That's what I like. Today was my official, yeah, this is really 1984ish, and I'm gonna explain why. So let me get into this post, and I'm gonna probably try to get into some examples of the like what Grok put out, because it was Grok, Perplexity, and DeepSeek that I had asked this question to. So getting into, shout out to Nick Anthony, by the way. Um, After reading more than 300 pages of congressional transcript from 1968 to 1970, I finally found the first sentence in which someone said the Bank Secrecy Act would harm financial privacy. So he gets into Clifford Summer, American Bankers Association, urged Congress to reconsider what it was doing. Not a single witness before him, albeit all government officials, seemed to be concerned about the Fourth Amendment or people's privacy. So now getting into the post itself. Ooh, I'm down. Okay. So the operation of such institutions or are reasonably directed towards law enforcement activities. Banks have no obligation, banks have an obligation to their customers to maintain the privacy of personal financial affairs, except in response to subpoenas or other regular legal process. To maintain to the maintenance of individuals' rights of privacy, to wait, sorry. The maintenance of an individual's rights of privacy has also quite purportedly been a matter of concern to the Congress. One concrete example of this concern is shown in HR 12582, a bill to protect the privacy of depositors at insured banks and other institutions, introduced by Mr. McClure and referred to your committee. When action is taken on HR 15073, we urge that information be made available to law enforcement agencies from bank records be confined to the records of those persons who are subject to active investigations and only in response to subpoenas or comparable legal process. This would protect the rights of the individual and the responsibility of the financial institution, and would be consistent with long recognized principles of law. Turning now to provision of HR, and he says another thing. So what generates this is he is I think a year or two before, well, one, he's the Bankers Association guy, right? The American Bankers Association guy. So that's one thing that gets into why he was brought in on this particular hearing and like what was going on. Hold on. What am I looking for? Yeah. Let me set this up while I'm talking. So he's brought in because he's the American Bankers Associate head guy, so he would have a insightful position on this thing. Now, before that, he also used to work, I believe it was on the IRS side, and then he did some other stuff in relation to the financing world. But he was, at least for one of the sources that I was going through, it mentioned how he was trying to get information on something where it was like mafia connected, and then they realized that the people were using Swiss bank accounts, And so when he tried to do the legal process to be like, hey, can we get this information? They were like, nah, we got Swiss Secrecy Act. We can't talk to you. Leave us alone. And when he tried to push it through Congress, they were like, well, you know what? Leave it alone. I say this in context to say he was not anti-law enforcement. His issue was what they looked to introduce the Bank Secrecy Act in that time and in the framework of was we just want to blanket watch everyone that has a bank account in whatever financial institution within the US. That's not what he was for. So now when I go into the different LLMs, aka AI stuff, I'm like, all right. So one of the questions that I started off with was, who is Clifford Sommer, and what role did he play in the passing of the Bank Secrecy Act? This is Grok. Grok is like, all right, Clifford. They just called him Cliff for short. He was born this year. He passed. Wow, 1993 is when he passed. Damn. Wow. Okay. He lived pretty up there because he was born in 1908. And from Minnesota, blah blah blah. Where is the part that I'm looking for? Open new. Oh, nope, damn it. Come on. Expand. There we go. All right. Okay, so let me bring this window over so y'all can see what I'm talking about. There are too many other windows open up, so yeah, I can't get to what you call it. So, all right. Passings, National Guard. Where is it at? Hold it, Minnesota. Shape. Okay, so in this second and third paragraph, Clifford played an indirect, influential role in the BSA's passage through his leadership in the banking community. As a president of the Minnesota Bankers Association in 1970, as the same year it was passed, Summers represented bankers' interests at the national level during congressional deliberation. When I initially threw this over to Perplexity told me, well, oh, he didn't testify. He didn't actually talk to Congress. And then it was like, oh, well, we can't get any quotes of what he actually said. Mind you, that's what got me, where it's like, well, I thought the congressional library information, X amount of it is digitized, so you should be able to have access to it. But apparently there's a whole different thing in regards to like how the LLMs are set up for what type of information they can access. As we all know, it's humans that put this stuff together. But what still gets me is um I asked Perplexity first. It told me some things that I'm like, well, that kind of counters what the post said. Let me go ask DeepSeek. I asked DeepSeek. DeepSeek gives me some extra information. Well, hey, there's a rule called the Sommer rule, and it was based on, when he was doing blah 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 and investigation stuff or some financial thing, and like here's where he played into the role, but he didn't testify in front of Congress. This is a second AI that says he doesn't testify to Congress. He didn't get to talk to them, and like there's no real record of what his position was. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper, right? You got to scratch it a little bit. So now I'm like, well, that contradicts this. Grok is saying that there's a post on Twitter that says, here's the public record. Here's his position on it. He wasn't against law enforcement, but he didn't agree with mass surveillance. Perplexity was like, oh yeah, let me review the information. Yes, you're right. His position is blah blah blah. DeepSeek, same thing. You know what? After reviewing what you just said with what I'm able to research through, well, you're right. Grok does the same thing. My point to all of this is, as we move further and further into this whole AI world and how Elon Musk and what's his face from Chat GPT is like, yes, everyone's going to be using AI for this, AI for that. Like, you really, really gotta use this in a cautionary tale. Because if you, and I don't know how else to word this, if you don't know how to like ask that follow-up question, or like this thing happened in history. Like, remember, like I think the first situation I had was where I was asking about that Bitcoin Italia thing, and I was like, well, doesn't this and what they're doing go against the original ideals of Bitcoin, which was about self-custody? And in the initial response, it was like, well, no, this is still self-custody because the company's doing blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but in the white paper, it says X, Y, and Z. How is that still following peer level self-custody? As much as I like using this stuff for you can definitely troll the hell out of people with the LLMs. Like, no lie. Somebody posts something, you just copy it over or take the screenshot and then put it in, and then like, well, how do you counter this argument, or how do you poke fun at blah blah blah? It'll give you 101 things. And I do like it in regards to like when I be writing stuff for LinkedIn, I'll throw it into different ones and I'll say like, does this make sense? What's the strong point? What's the weak point? And I'll make adjustments on stuff, right? What is that? Like, it's not vibe coding. I'm gonna call it vibe writing, right? It works good for that particular thing that I need it for. And then like there's a couple of other things that I'm looking to do on the digital side that I've thrown out as project ideas, and just seeing like what they each come up with and like what steps do they break down, or like what companies or softwares do they recommend for what I'm trying to get done. And it's interesting to note the similarities, as well as it's interesting to note the differences. In those regards, I guess those kind of like um practical, functional areas of research, they're good. I enjoy how they work and I like using them. But when it comes to things that are historical, as far as like black and white or like opinionated or something, it's a very scary, in my mind, slippery slope in how the information that they um present to the end user is jaded. And if you don't know how to do the follow-up question and how to get it to either reevaluate or rethink something, like, you just walk away thinking the first initial response is the what it is. That's the correct answer. Or that's the right interpretation of whatever that historical thing was. And that's the part that I don't like right now, is how that's playing out. Um and I'm catching it more and more. That's the other part. Like, it's happening, but it's not happening in the other things that I'm asking questions about. As far as like, well, example of what was the other thing I was talking about like recently? Solar winds. I never understood. I've heard the phrase for years about solar winds, but I never understood what generated solar winds. And so that because I was paying attention to the 3i Atlas thing, and trying to make heads or tails of some of the stuff that some of the astronomers are saying. And it's just like, well, what does that mean? And they take certain things for granted, so they don't always explain everything. And so that was one of the examples of like, all right, well, they can't mess up explaining solar winds, and they didn't. Like, that worked out. But what I've noted is, when it comes to the more opinionated slash historical things, it's a very 1984's vibe. Where are you? Sorry, I'm over here trying to maneuver into a different window. Where'd you go? No, no, no. That's not you. All right. Sorry, y'all. Let me get over to this last joint, and then yeah, that's it. So what was the other thing? I thought I bookmarked that one. Damn. Okay, I guess I did not. There was um a spaces apparently that happened, and Ross Ulbricht was on there, and it's not in relation to this post, but nope, that's not what I'm trying to do. There we go. So here we are. Free Samurai, go Free Samurai. I don't know if this is the actual direct Samurai wallet, folks. Is it? Free Samurai devs code not a crime. Right. So I'm throwing this out there because I do agree with this statement, with the sentiment, with the intention of um coding isn't the crime. The crime is the part of like quote how people are using it. Because like to say that the coding is the crime in some arguments is like, well, that's the saying that the thought is the crime, right? Versus it's the action. And then the perpetrator is the person who took the action. But lawyers be lawyers, right? And we have it that we're here now where the folks who are behind Samurai Wallet, which is one of the older wallets within the crypto space, they are now in full on prosecution mode by our our folks, our folks, our government, and they're about to be facing some time. So I throw this out there as far as if you are on the same ideal page, check out the free samurai .com for what's going on with them, and like the petition thing that I believe it was through change.org is the hosting platform for the petition for them to get the pardon or like some kind of review. If you're interested, check it out. Because this is part of what worked to get Ross out. And shout outs to his mom. I know she was definitely on the warpath and getting that done for a very, very long time. And I know in certain moments it could have just seemed like it was a never gonna happen day. And lo and behold, here's where we are now. Shout outs to Ross. For coming out. I haven't been paying as much attention as I probably should to like see what he's been talking about, because I figured it was going to be one of those like give him a cool off of like let him get through this first year of being out and just like acclimated it back to regular life stuff. But the bigger point is that we see this example all the time in how we know that guns don't kill people. It's the people who use the weapon as a tool to unalive someone else, right? But we don't go after gun manufacturers. We don't go after the bullet manufacturers. We don't go after the company that makes the that actually does the metal that does the metal work, the smelting that goes into making a barrel, that goes into making the striker or the firing pin, right? We don't go after those people who quote make the instrument. It's the same scenario here. We don't need to go after the person who writes the code. You need to go after the person who actually did the crime. At least my logic on it. At least my logic on it. Not saying, well, no, I am actually saying I feel like I'm right. Like I feel like this is how we should approach this. But I feel like in being in today's modern world, one of the things that kind of gets me at times is realizing like lawyers, like there's so many examples of how we see lawyers being lawyers. Case in point, you have through the FDA, Food Drug Administration, there is a level of poison that is acceptable to have in your food. There's an acceptable level of insects like remains that are acceptable to be in your food. There's even with like your cell phones, there's an acceptable level of radiation that you can be exposed to. And all of that is on lawyers being lawyers, right? Because we'll argue about words and like not mincing how things are, but like really parsing out, what shall versus should means. Like, this is the world we live in, and sometimes I really have to scratch my head about it. But that's all I got for y'all. Yeah, I still did run on time, even though I had way less stories compared to other times. But y'all know how I am. If you've been listening any bit of time, you know what's up. Other than that, I hope something I said scratches your brain, gets you aware, makes you ask a question. If you asking a question with the LLMs, make sure you have the follow-up question. Um, Even if you don't know exactly what to ask like 2 follow-up questions just to test to see, is that AI giving you the most accurate information. Just saying, I'm noticing a trend, and these AIs are coming off real 1984. So I'm gonna close it out with that, because as I say, folks, it's a Monday. I hope you had a good weekend. I know things are kind of rough out here for folks. For those of you who are still looking to, wake up on the right side of the bed or the right side of the dirt, as some folks say, I appreciate you. And if nobody told you, thank you for continuing to be here. Like I said, man, stuff be out here happening, and I just be hearing things at times, and I'll be thankful for little things, and that's what it is. So as I say, closing out, from one human to the next, the best thing that I can wish for y'all is to be in a safe place, in a safe space, and in good company. And until the next one, it's a Monday, and I will see y'all. And hopefully everything goes good for you until then, right? Adios, amigos. I'm Trek with 2 Ks.